This is the second part of the presentation where we are going to discuss the various fiber types, and let's look at the types of fibers that we see in the cerebral cortex. We have three main types of fibers: commissural fibers, association fibers, and projection fibers. Commissural fibers are those fibers which connect the same areas of the two cerebral hemispheres. So, for example, the frontal lobe will be connected to the frontal lobe. So, frontal lobe of one hemisphere will be connected to the frontal lobe of the other. The parietal of one will be connected to the parietal of the other. The occipital of one will be connected to the occipital of the other, and the temporal of one will be connected to the temporal of the other. And what this does is, there is what is known as a hemispherical transfer of information. So, whatever is happening in one functional area on one side, that information gets transferred to the other side also. So, it's almost like the left cerebral hemisphere gets to know what the right one is doing. So, that is what the commissural fibers do, and the biggest set of commissural fibers is the corpus callosum. The next type of fibers are the association fibers. Here they connect various parts of the cortex within the same cerebral hemisphere. So here in other words, what they are doing is they are connecting different functional areas within the same cerebral hemisphere. And here we have sometimes fibers which connect areas lying very close to each other. So, for example, say the sensory cortex is connected to the motor cortex, so they lie very close to each other, the postcentral with the precentral gyrus. So, such type of fibers will be known as short association fibers. Then we have areas connected which lie far apart. For example, like you did the visual system, and if you remember, the occipital cortex was connected to the frontal eye field. So, you can see how long the distance is going from one end to the other. So, such fibers are known as long association fibers. And in the long association fibers, there are two main bundles, one lying above and then one lying below, and we'll see that in the next image. So, that is a function of association fibers, to connect different functional areas within the same cerebral hemisphere. And lastly, we have projection fibers, and projection fibers are fibers which connect the cerebral cortex and the brainstem with areas below the spinal cord, for example. So, these are fibers which you have done already, and these are the various tracks that you have done, the sensory and motor, or also afferent and efferent. So, you remember the afferent they were from the spinal cord. So, let's say that this area is the spinal cord. So, from the spinal cord you had fibers which went up to the thalamus, and then from the thalamus they went up to the cortex. And then we also had fibers which began in the cortex and they traveled down. So, they came all the way down to the spinal cord, so traveling in the opposite direction, or they went off to the brainstem nuclei, or you had fibers which began in the brainstem and then came down. So, you can see all of these are projecting to different areas. So, that's why these are known as projection fibers. And as these fibers pass down or go up, then they travel through that region which is known as the internal capsule, where they are very closely packed, and then when they spread out as they are going or coming from the cortex, that area here is known as the corona radiata. Let's now look at the next slide, which shows us some of these fibers. So, here you can see the corpus callosum, and it is connecting the two cerebral hemispheres. The functional areas of the two cerebral hemispheres are connected to the same functional area, so occipital with occipital. So this gives information from one side to the other, and that's how you have the hemispherical transfer of information. So one cerebral hemisphere is kept alert about what's happening in the other cerebral hemisphere. So these were commissural fibers. Here we have association fibers. So you can see the short association fibers connecting close gyri with, and they are different functionally. So you have the sensory connected to the motor, or the motor connected to the premotor. So these are short association fibers. Then we have the long association fibers, which connect, for example, here you're connecting the frontal lobe to the occipital. So you have the superior longitudinal fasciculus, and this is where, for example, in the visual in the visual pathway you had where fibers went to the frontal eye field. So you can see they'll pass through like this. So this is called the superior longitudinal fasciculus. And then this inferior longitudinal fasciculus is connecting the occipital to the temporal lobe. So this is where it is. And then you have others which, as you can see here, connecting the frontal to the temporal. So this is known as the uncinate fasciculus. So there are different names given to many of them. Cingulum, this is called the cingulum. So you don't need to know all of them, just know that there are short fibers, there are long fibers, and you should know the superior and inferior and what areas they connect. So again, it's important to have a visual image, so then you'll be able to tell which areas are connected by superior longitudinal fasciculus and which areas are connected by the inferior longitudinal fasciculus. Then we have up here, these are projection fibers. This is just showing you one of them. So you can see these arrows going down, those are the descending tracts, and then you have these going up, so these are ascending tracts. So all descending and ascending tracts form part of the projection fibers, and only one type is shown over here. Let's go to the next slide, which is this one, and this shows you a good example of how association fibers connect different functional areas within the same cerebral hemisphere. And this is an example of where you're asked to speak something that is written down. So first, what you have to do, if you just think about it, something is written on a piece of paper. So in order to read it, you first look at it. So you see it, which means it goes to the visual cortex. After you see it, you have to understand it. So you have to understand it, which means it has to go to the receptive speech area, or what is called sensory speech, which means it goes to the Wernicke's area. From there, after you've understood it, then it has to be transferred to the expressive speech, because you want to say it out loud. So that means it goes to the Broca's area. And in order to say it out loudly, the Broca's speech area has to take the help of the lips and the tongue and the laryngeal muscles in order to produce speech, which means it has to go to the motor area of the brain, or the primary motor area. So that's how the pathway is. And in order to show you this, so here if you look at it, so you can see that you have read, something is written down, so you have read it, which means that you use your visual cortex. Then you've understood it, which means you use your sensory speech area, which is part of this Wernicke's within the temporal and the parietal lobes. So from the occipital lobe, it goes to the temporoparietal area. From there, after you've understood it, now you transfer it to the Broca's area in the frontal lobe, so that now you can express it. And in order to produce speech, this Broca's speech area, which is the expressive speech area, takes the help of the primary motor cortex, and you can see it is this lower part of the precentral gyrus, because this is where the lips and the tongue would be represented. If you remember, the body is represented in this fashion. So this is where the tongue and the lips would be. So that's how this takes care of that. So this is how you would speak the written word. Let's look at another example where you're going to speak the heard word. So here you hear the word, which means that you use your auditory cortex, which is in the temporal lobe. Then from there you have to understand it. So again it goes to the sensory speech area or the Wernicke's in the temporal parietal lobe. From there then it gets transferred to the expressive speech or the Broca's speech area, which is present in the frontal lobe, which then makes use of the lips and the tongue, so the motor, primary motor area, again in the frontal lobe. So that's what you're seeing. So and again, in order to take a look at this, so here you hear the word, then you, in order to understand it, you send it to the Wernicke's area, and then from the Wernicke's area it's sent to the motor area, because now you want to express it, which takes the help of the motor cortex to use the lips and the tongue and so on. So it goes from temporal to temporal parietal to frontal, and again the lower part of the precentral gyrus in the frontal lobe. So this is how you speak the heard word. So you can see how association fibers are connecting different functional areas within the same cerebral hemisphere. The next thing we are going to talk about is hemispherical dominance, and this is a nice image which gives you some of the properties of the different cerebral hemispheres. And when you talk about hemispherical dominance, what you're referring to is the fact that one hemisphere leads the other one in certain functions. So it leads the other one in certain functions, and which are those functions which we think are important? The most important is the language function. So that's why we say that the talking hemisphere is the dominant hemisphere. That means the one in which the language function resides, in which the speech areas reside. Handedness is not related to linguistic dominance, because even in left-handed people, so if you just look at handedness, which is refers to which hemisphere has major control over motor activity. So let's say someone is right-handed, then in them the left cerebral hemisphere is dominant, but that means that is here when we say it is dominant, we are only talking about motor control. So here the left cerebral hemisphere controls the right side. If someone is left-handed, then we'll say the right cerebral hemisphere is controlling as far as motor activity, has major control over motor activity. But in case of linguistic dominance, both in people who are right-handed and people who are left-handed, the language area is on the left side. So that's why we say that the left hemisphere is most often dominant in most people, and that's because the linguistic, that when we are talking about that, we are talking about linguistic dominance. But otherwise, as far as dominance goes, there are other functions where one hemisphere is a little more dominant than the other. So take a look at this image, and let's move on to the next one, where I'm talking about some of the features where one hemisphere is more dominant compared to the other as far as certain of these aspects are concerned. The first one, the left is a more analytical kind of hemisphere. The right is more global, or what is also called more holistic, encompasses a lot of things, more creative. This one is a more creative kind of hemisphere. This has a successive type of style. This has a simultaneous type of style. That's why this one does things in a more sequential and linear kind of manner, and tends to therefore respond to logic, and it tends to plan ahead because everything is done very sequentially. The right one, on the other hand, does things randomly. Everything is done in a varied order. They don't respond to logic as much. They're more emotional, and hence they tend to be more impulsive. The left is more verbal. The right responds to more non-verbal skills, and hence therefore is more visual and auditory. In fact, it stores memory in more auditory, visual and spatial modes, whereas the right stores memory in more of a language form. The left stores memory in more of a language format, whereas the right stores memory in more of an auditory, visual and spatial mode. In the left cerebral hemisphere, it's from articles that I've read and journals that I've got this information from, it is noticed that they recall people's names more. These people recall people's faces more. And because these people are more creative and artistic, they tend to gesticulate a lot while speaking. The left hemispherical people, because they are more verbal, they don't need gestures to express what they are saying. It's also noticed these people are more punctual. They tend to do things, they plan ahead, so they obviously arrive on time. These people don't, so they are less punctual. These people tend to like music and sound when they are studying, whereas these people prefer a more formal study design. They don't want any distractions. They like bright light, whereas these people like to move around while they are studying. So these are some things that I found in different journals that I read. Now often it is noticed that one is not truly, you don't have all the characteristics of just the left or right. You tend to have a bit of both. So, it will be interesting for you all to look over these and see which hemispherical style you have more, right or left. Let's now look at lesions. So let's look at what happens when we have frontal lobe lesions. Obviously, when the frontal lobe is involved, the primary thing that happens is that you have the motor cortex which is involved. So if the motor cortex is involved, obviously you will have what is called contralateral paralysis, and it will be of the upper motor neuron type. And if there's a destruction of the primary and the secondary motor areas, then you have a more complete form of contralateral paralysis because you involve the extrapyramidal tracts also. And then you have all the properties of upper motor neuron lesion. For example, you have spasticity, the superficial reflexes are lost, the other tendon reflexes tend to be exaggerated, clonus is seen. So, you'll have all of the features of upper motor neuron type of paralysis. Then if the motor area is, if there is an irritative lesion, you get what is known as Jacksonian type of epileptic seizures. And seizures just mean that there is an alteration in behavior due to an abnormal burst of firing of neurons in the cerebral cortex. So if the if the motor area is irritated, there's an abnormal burst, and then that's why it gives rise to seizures. Now, if the Broca's area is involved, you'll have expressive aphasia. That means the person has an inability to produce speech. But however, they can read, understand and write whatever they want to say. So whatever kind of speech comes out of their mouth sounds weird, but these people know exactly that they are making a mistake. It's just that they cannot correct it. So they know that they're saying things in a wrong manner, and because the Broca's area cannot connect to the motor area, and if the motor area is also involved, then the lips and the tongue would be involved. So the speech that comes out sounds weird, but these people know they are making a mistake, but they can't do anything about it. Then we have apraxia, and apraxia is usually seen when the premotor cortex is involved, and if you remember, this was where programming of movements occurred. So if premotor cortex is involved, there is no paralysis, but these people they have an inability to carry out voluntary activity. So apraxia is an inability to carry out voluntary activity, but there is no paralysis. So that means in this case, the motor area was not involved, it was just the premotor area. And then if we have the prefrontal cortex involved, you get all kinds of problems with these people. They have what is known, they have unacceptable social behavior, because you remember the premotor cortex was, the prefrontal lobe was important because it had, it was responsible for behavior, how you behaved in society, for judgment. You had problem solving, your sexual behavior, all of these were included in the prefrontal area. So when this this area goes, these people behave in a very odd fashion. They are unable to focus on tasks. They cannot plan ahead. Problem solving becomes difficult for them. There is a change in personality and behavior. They have what is known, sometimes may end up with what is called a mercurial temper, so they tend to blow off, and they do things they would normally not have done. And one famous example which is given is of this railroad worker who was known as Phineas Gage, and he was working in a railroad, and they used to blast areas so that they could lay down tracks. And once, when dynamite was being blasted, a piece passed through, and it went through his orbit and out. So it went, so if this was his face, it went off this way. So when it went through this way, it kind of passed through the prefrontal lobe, and after the incident, he survived the accident. After the incident, it was noticed that his behavior changed suddenly. He started, he used to have, he started behaving in a very unacceptable fashion. He would defecate in public. He would talk nonsense. He would, his whole personality had changed. He was given to sudden mood changes. He would yell and scream and talk obscene, so things like that changed with him, and that reason was that the prefrontal cortex was involved. And those of you who've seen the movie One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, in that case, in that you notice that a prefrontal lobotomy was done. That means where all the frontal lobe connections, the prefrontal area connections, were cut off. So obviously then the person becomes like a vegetable at that time, because there all of these other things which they normally do, they can't do. So you damage and cut off all the connections, and then the person sort of tends to become a recluse. And so if you haven't seen that movie, that's a good movie to see, which kind of gives you an idea of what happens when this kind of thing is done, prefrontal lobotomy as it's called. The next is the parietal lobe, which is the main sensory area, and in this, these people have sensory loss. Obviously, if the sensory cortex is involved, there will be contralateral sensory disturbances. So you'll have crude, painful, tactile, thermal stimuli will be lost, and they may return if the thalamus is intact. If the association cortex is gone, then you have what is known as agnosia. And agnosia, what happens in agnosia is there is a general awareness of sensations persists. So if you're pricked, the person will feel it. But the significance of the information, which is based on previous experience, that is lost. So for example, if somebody burnt themselves on a stove once, and the next time they go near the stove and they get hurt, they know, oh, okay, this was what happened last time. I must, I must avoid this. In these people, if the association cortex is gone, because remember that's where memory based on past experiences is stored, that is gone. So they can feel things, but the significance of that information is lost. So that's what happens when they have when the association areas of the parietal lobe are gone. These people also suffer from something which is known as Hemi Neglect, because if you remember, the parietal lobe was responsible for spatial relationships. So these people, they do not realize that the other one half of their body belongs to them. So they neglect that half of the body. So they will, for example, just comb their hair on one side, they will groom themselves on one side, they'll apply makeup on one side, totally ignoring the other half of the body. So that's what is known as Hemi Neglect. And because of loss of spatial relations, they might even tell you that, I feel as if somebody is lying next to me. So, because they've lost that side, they don't think that side belongs to them. They lose their way around in familiar surroundings. For example, in their own house, they may not be able to find their way around. They may not know where the living room is, or the family room, or the bathroom. They lose their way around. Obviously, in a parking lot, you can understand where they'll not be. They'll be totally lost. These people can't read maps. They can't read maps, and they also have an inability to read and understand in these people, so that's because of the receptive aphasia. In fact, they are able to talk normally. In other words, that the speech that comes out doesn't sound, when you listen to it, it doesn't sound weird. In other words, the actual way they speak is not weird, but it is totally, it's like a word salad. So they don't make any sense, but they talk normally. So for example, they may talk like, they may say you ask them a question, what is your name? They may say something like knife, fork, bar, let's say knife, fork, bar, mall. So, you know, the words sound normal, but it makes no sense. So that's why it's known as word salad. So these people have no idea. This is known as receptive aphasia. So they have no idea that they are talking nonsense. They talk fluently, but they're not even aware of the failure to produce meaningful words. And this is different from expressive aphasia, where a person with expressive aphasia can hear that he or she is talking in an odd manner, but they can't do anything about it. Whereas these people, they'd have no idea that they are talking nonsense. So that's because since they don't understand what is being said to them, they just make up whatever reply they have to. So that's what is known as receptive aphasia. If the lower part of the post-central gyrus is involved, these people will have loss of taste sensation. Obviously, the gustatory cortex will go, so they'll have loss of taste sensation. And they also have what is known as prosopagnosia, which is inability to distinguish faces, or also called face blindness. So this is called face blindness. So these are some of the things that are seen with parietal lobe lesions. It's when you see these patients, sometimes, you know, they may be labeled crazy if you don't know some of these things happen. For example, you know, applying makeup to one side, or just combing one side of the body, or somebody coming and telling you that, you know, I feel somebody is lying next to me, whereas it's just their other half of the body. Other things that actually happen with these people is that they lose, they're unable to do things sequentially. For example, if they have to make tea, or, you know, wear their clothes. Normally, let's say you have to wear your clothes, what would you do? You would wear your undergarments first, and then you would wear a shirt and your trouser, and then finally your jacket. People like this would probably wear their jacket first and then try to wear their undergarments on top. So they're not able to do things in a normal sequential manner. Let's say they had to make tea. For example, they would pour the, what would you do? You would heat water, then once the water is boiling, you would put your tea bag in and, you know, do something like that. These people will do things in a very, very odd manner, would not go through the steps normally. And it's important to know that these things happen with parietal lobe lesions, because if not, these people could be just labeled as psychiatric cases. Let's look at the other lobes, which now here we have the temporal lobe. In temporal lobe lesion, obviously the first thing that you think of is hearing loss, and remember, it is partial deafness in these cases, because sound is represented on both sides. And they also have what is known as auditory agnosia. That means they fail to identify and respond appropriately to complex sounds, because the significance of that information is lost. Again, because the Wernicke's area is gone, so they also have receptive aphasia, much like in the parietal lobe. You have prosopagnosia or face blindness with temporal lobe lesions also. And also with temporal lobe lesions, you have short-term memory loss, because the short-term memory is represented in the hippocampal area. And because the temporal lobe is connected to the limbic system, these people may have an increase or decrease in sexual behavior. They may have, other things which are to do with limbic system. Some of those autonomic functions may also change in these people. So, they may be too emotional or less emotional. So because of its connections with the limbic system, you might have some of those disorders of the limbic system seen with temporal lobe lesions. With occipital lobe lesions, again, because occipital lobe, the main function is vision, so you have loss of the opposite field of vision. So if the right lobe is involved, you'll have loss of left field of vision. Large lesions sometimes spare the macular area, and this is because of anastomosis between the posterior and middle cerebral arteries, which supply the area devoted to central vision. To show you that, so let's say that this is the cerebral hemisphere, and let me actually show it to you here. So this is the cerebral hemisphere. Now this area up here, all of this area is supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. This area is supplied by the posterior cerebral artery, and the central vision is somewhere represented somewhere here. And this area is supplied by the middle cerebral artery. So the middle and the posterior cerebral artery have an anastomosis in this area. So very large lesions which involve here, this part, they spare the macula because of this, because of the anastomosis between the middle cerebral artery and the posterior cerebral artery. Then if the association cortex is gone, then you have visual agnosia. So again, you cannot, the significance of information is gone. So they can't recognize motion, their visual memories go, they can't direct their gaze at a select object, they can't carry out movements which are visually directed. They have loss of color vision also. So these are some of the things that happen with the occipital lobe lesions. Let's now look briefly at Alzheimer's disease. This is a huge topic by itself, so I'm just going to describe it briefly. Important things to know about Alzheimer's disease is that it's a degenerative disease. The distinct cause is not known. It's thought to be genetic, and they say that some proteins are linked with greater incidence. You find one of the things that is seen in this is that you find neurofibrillary tangles. So there are neurofibrillary tangles. These that you're seeing up here, these are neurofibrillary tangles, where you have an increased amount of what are known as beta amyloid proteins. And because of an increased amount of beta amyloid proteins, there is a decrease in some neurotransmitters, and the most important being acetylcholine. So that is affected in this. The hippocampal area is involved to a great extent, and that leads to early memory loss, dementia. Dementia is when there is gradually, so let me write this down. Dementia is a process where there is gradually increasing restriction of daily activities. And when this happens, the person can't remember, they can't learn, they can't communicate properly. It changes a person's mood and personality. So that is one of the common features that is seen in Alzheimer's disease. There is early memory loss because the hippocampus is involved, and if you look at this diagram, this is a healthy brain. This area here is the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is the area which stores memory, and it's also linked to the limbic systems, so with personality and all of that comes under that. So in mild Alzheimer's disease, there's a shrinkage of the hippocampus, and a very severe, you can see how much it has shrunk. So here you can see that there's a severe shrinkage of the hippocampus, and that leads to the early memory loss. And in this image you can see that there's so much shrinkage in other parts of the brain also. There is disintegration of personality, and that that's what is meant by person's mood and personality changes. They are disoriented. People suffering from Alzheimer's often tend to walk out of their house, get disoriented, and don't know where they are. So that happens fairly often. There is speech deterioration, restlessness is commonly seen, And in late stages, these people become totally bedridden. Their loss of speech makes them mute, and often the death is due to some other problem that they may have, some other disease takes over. And microscopically, as I said, you find these neurofibrillary tangles, the brain shrinks, and again, different areas are involved. Most often it starts with the hippocampus and the temporal lobe, where you have this entorhinal cortex and association area. And these tangles, when they are formed, and these are beta amyloid, as I said, they also end up forming plaques, and this is where there is accumulation of proteins. So this is one of the things that is seen in Alzheimer's disease. So with that, we'll stop here. So this finishes the cerebral cortex, and take time to listen to this presentation also carefully and go over all that has been described.